Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have two amazing guests to introduce to you now. Dr. Gary Fettke is an orthopedic surgeon practicing in Tasmania. He has a major interest in preventative medicine and encourages his patients to lose weight before undergoing surgery. He is an advocate of a low-carbohydrate, high-fat lifestyle for various health benefits, including the reversal of type 2 diabetes. Along with his wife, Belinda, Gary has also opened Nutrition for Life, Diabetes and Health Research Center, which provides nutritional care around Tasmania and Australia. His wife, Belinda, took the initiative researching the biohistory of religion and influences of nutrition and dietary guidelines in order to better understand why her husband was targeted for using a high-fat, low-carbohydrate diet by the Australian Health Practitioners Regulation Agency and the Tasmanian Health Service. Her research revealed a massive influence of Seventh-day Adventism and cereal companies' impact on creating dietary guidelines. Dr. Gary Fettke and Belinda Fettke, what an absolute honor it is to welcome both of you to Boundless Body Radio.
Great to catch up.
Very good to be here. Thank you. It's such an honor to have both of you. I followed both of you for a very long time. We share a mutual friend in Vinny Tortorich, who is, he's been in the low carbohydrate space for a long time. He's a filmmaker, which you should know because you've been in his movie. And there is, in his very first documentary, a documentary, there's an interview with you where you're talking about amputations. And then all of a sudden, really quickly, there is a scene of a diabetic amputation. And it comes on so fast, you almost can't avoid it, which is probably good because I don't know that I would have gone seeking that. But oh my goodness, you cannot unsee that once you see what that looks like. Did you ever get used to doing that?
No, it's a sickening feeling, amputating limbs. That's it. I mean, and particularly in diabetes, which is an unnecessary operation. You know, it's years in the making by the, of poor dietary control, and I'll say poor dietary control rather than poor medical control, because I don't think you need all the drugs that we're throwing at patients with diabetes. And these patients, not patients, they're people. You actually get to know them. It's not a one-off visit when you come along. They start with a little ulcer, then the ulcer gets worse, and then it becomes infected, and you're trying to treat that. And then you might be trimming a bit of a toe, and then you're taking off the next toe, and then the next one after that, and a bit of the foot, and then ultimately, for too many, then you're taking off a limb. And that noise, and it is a thud into a stainless steel bucket, you can't get used to that. And that was really becoming a weekly practice for me, just to be trimming bits of toes and feet. Not once a week, but I regularly have a couple of patients. And my Friday clinics at the hospital ended up being called Fettke's Fettke's fructose-free, effed up, fungating foot folly Fridays. There's a lot of F's there. But essentially, you'd come along into the clinic and it literally a smell of rotting flesh. Now, I know that sounds disgusting, but when you keep seeing that week in and week out, and because no one else wants to take on these patients, it's not a happy experience because you're in a no-win situation. And then when we started, I had those patients in hospital, and they were being given ice cream as part of the hospital dietary guidelines. For diabetes, I went, hang on, whoa, that was the light bulb moment for me. And I said, will you stop giving it to them? I said, no, that's the hospital guidelines. That's the national food guidelines for people in hospital. And I've been challenged on that, but I've also presented to the national hospital food industry at their national meeting. And I put up their guidelines. They said, that's not it. And I said, well, actually, this is what your guidelines are. I gave them a big hashtag fail. I was then invited to come back and speak 2 years later. They couldn't cope with me 12 months later. But essentially, when you're pointing out such a flawed process, but anyway, literally my patients in hospital, if I reduced their sugar and carbs and reduced and increased their protein, like literally coming into hospital, stop eating sugar, stop eating, processed carbs, and I'd write on the medication chart 2 pieces of cheese and 2 eggs. I had to prescribe eggs to my patient because they weren't available. And so literally just by doing that, reducing sugar, giving them a little bit of protein, we're able to save toes and feet. So imagine what you then do, extrapolate that across the wider population, and you start doing that at a guideline basis, because most people, health practitioners in the Western world, don't want to step outside the guidelines. And the guidelines are wrong, and they're actually causing harm. And so if the guidelines are wrong, and we believe they're wrong, and in fact, I think they're energy dense, nutrient poor guidelines, then you've got to say, why aren't they changing? Why aren't the guidelines following the science? And it's because there are vested interests in this in place since 1910, 1917. And that's where Belinda's work's just become so critical, because myself, others in this space have been going blue in the face talking about science, the results, the patient benefits, and yet literally the system doesn't want to know about it, or is just starting to hear about it. They've been hearing about it, but they've been ignoring us.
Yeah, wow, that's stunning. You have been featured prominently, both of you, in this wonderful book, The Great Plant-Based Con by Jane Buxton. And she gives you, Belinda, all of the credit in an entire chapter for that research, which is quite extensive. And when you go back and look at the story of what happened in both of your lives over the last 10, 12 years, it's bananas in so many different ways.
We can't talk about bananas because the bananas are bad. Okay, all right.
Too high fructose. It's crazy. It's just crazy what you guys have been through. And so let's kind of dive in there. You guys have been married for 40 years, and Gary is
next year.
Next year. Awesome. That's great. Congratulations. You're learning. You're looking around and learning that people are getting the wrong food in hospitals. They're getting the wrong food recommended to them by the guidelines. Can you guide us along kind of what happened in your personal story?
Well, the guidelines are what determines what food is served in hospitals, nursing homes, schools, what children are educated in, as well as what's served to the Defence Forces and the prison. So it's an enormous spread of influence. And these government bodies have sort of got to follow suit.
That's education
and
health professionals.
And it's education for all health professionals. And I say what it is, it's generational education. Because we do, and we believe what our teachers taught us, and we believe, and they believe what their teachers taught them. And if it's in your textbooks, and those textbooks, as it turns out, have been written by the food and pharmaceutical industry since 1910 and 1917, that's just continued to flow on, because that was in the textbooks. But when you realize the textbooks way back were actually written by those who were conflicted by religious ideology and this belief that it was this was the best way to go, when in fact it was literally a religious belief, based on the visions of a prophetess, and then that whole concept, which is scary, that the whole food pyramid, that cereal and grain base, is really based on the concept of trying to stop us to masturbate. And I know that's a big leap, but when you go back, that's what happened. And the Seventh-day Adventist Church are the second biggest educator in the world after the Catholic Church. They've been positioning themselves into our health education for over 100 years. They've been writing the textbooks for the Western civilization, or Western communities for, again, 100 years. And here we are today with an obesity epidemic, metabolic health completely out of control. Data out of the US only a few weeks ago, 93% of the US population are metabolically unwell.
Yeah, and that's of 2018. That's still pre-pandemic. That's scary.
Yes, and that's up from 88% only a couple of years before.
Right.
So it is just, and it's no different here. I mean, we might be marginally better, but I don't think so if you really start tunneling down. So those guidelines, I call our processed food experiment, is the biggest social experiment of the last 100 years, and it's failing. And so I better let Belinda talk a bit, because this is her her wisdom, and people really have to understand. And Belinda's contacted every day from people around the world to find out, what's the networking going on. I don't think anyone should enter a debate until Belinda's actually done the research as to who they're debating against. I've just been, speaking in a couple of meetings, and it's just really, really interesting to know where the other speakers' conflicts of interest are, particularly if they don't declare them.
Wow. Which is a big thing in Australia, right? It's a lot harder to find out conflicts of interest than it is even in America. That was surprising. I learned that from you guys.
Yeah, I think the reason I got into all of this was because the cereal industry targeted Gary for talking about sugar. I looked at who was the expert witness that was brought in, because Gary was investigated for 4.5 years, or investigated, sorry, for 2.5 years. And it took us another 2 years to get that determination overturned or just completely thrown out. And I just kept watching Gary and other low carb advocates starting to join up with this group, Low Carb Down Under, and create a bit of momentum. And I was watching them talk the science until they were blue in the face. And I thought, there's an issue here. The public are listening. Some health professionals are listening, but the rule keepers of the guidelines, which is what the biased guidelines, I don't believe it was making any impact. And I thought, well, this makes no sense. So I just looked at who was the expert witness that was brought into Gary's case by the AHPRA Medical Board. And I thought, I had a bit of cognitive dissonance, and I thought he must work for the sugar industry, because why on earth is Gary an orthopedic surgeon with a catchment area of about 120,000? We're one step away from Antarctica. Like, we're so far removed from the world. What sort of impact is he having? So it must be sugar. And the more research I did into this man, I uncovered the fact he was actually working for the cereal industry. So I thought, oh, okay, hadn't thought cereal, but of course, I uncovered some documents from this group called the Australian Breakfast Cereal Manufacturers Forum. And they were 4 specific cereal industries here in Australia, but a couple of them are worldwide, of course. So it was Kellogg's, Nestle, Sanitarium, and Freedom Foods. And this group got together each month to discuss strategies. Every 3 months, sorry. To discuss strategies around how to improve sales, obviously. And one particular set of documents were talking about the fact that their cereal sales were being harmed by advocates of low carb. And so I thought, all right. So
cereal sales were down.
Yes,
that's what they said. Cereal sales were down, and the concepts of low carb were to blame.
Yes.
And
Gary was the only medical doctor at that time listed among 14 names.
7. Seven.
Well, congratulations. Congratulations.
Well, I mean, we sort of went congratulations at one moment, and then we went, oh, swear word 4 letters, because this is multi-billion-dollar industries, international, who have decided that I'm for targeting. It says that's it. And if we were in other countries around the world, we might have been feeling under greater threat. Some of my talks have been translated into different languages, and I won't identify those people, but people ask me, they contact us, can I change this into this language? And I said, fine. He said, but I need to do it anonymously, because in our country, if I publish this, I might be knocked off. Literally. And they're brave young people, and it's easy for me to be brave from another country, but they're brave people. So actually, they felt so strongly that their country needed to hear that message that they started translating it. And I think that's fabulous. It's been able to be translated, but I'm just amazed. I'm not amazed. It's not a conspiracy if it turns out to be true.
That's right.
And therefore, there are major players here which have got huge amounts of money behind them, and who also have this huge amount of ideological belief that that's what they're doing. They're doing the right thing. And that reach of the Adventist Church into our dietary guidelines, flowed right through to the recent review of the American dietary guidelines, and the people who are looking at the meat section, or what they call the fat section, had significant conflicts with SDA. But then we also have those people at a very senior level within the World Health Organization, the United Nations. Here they are within Australia, And it's hard work for Belinda to find out where they are. But one of the good things is the Sunshine Act you have got in the US, because if they publish anything internationally, they have to declare it.
We don't have a Sunshine Act.
We don't have a Sunshine Act here in Australia.
Interesting. Wow.
And we don't have a university here where they train medical students owned by the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So again, I've been able to connect a lot of my research through the fact that in America you have a lot of educational facilities training doctors, nurses, dietitians, owned by the Seventh-day Adventist Church. But when I found this group of serial advocates targeting Gary, I often say the mama bear came out, and I thought, how am I going to protect him? How am I going to give him back his voice?
I'm fragile.
Yeah. After 2 years, the medical board here actually silenced Gary. The determination was that his silencing from talking about nutrition to his patients, to the wider community, was lifelong, non-appellable in a court of law. And we just went, this is ridiculous.
Even if it was shown to be best practice.
Yeah, even if it was shown to be best practice.
So even if it was shown to be best practice into the future, which it is, I was still not allowed to talk about it. And so if you think that's stupid, I mean, I help people out with AHPRA cases. I'm just so frustrated with someone's case last night. I think it's so unfair what's happening to her. But it's petty. It's beyond petty. I reckon they're dangerous because they're causing harm by restricting free speech.
Wow.
And I suppose we should just come back to your listeners to say, why are we going on about the Adventist Church? But they effectively started the cereal industry of the Western world, the soy industry of the Western world, and the start of the alternate meat industry, with huge links and ties to the startup of the stevia industry. So, and again, massive footprint at an educational level around the world, and particularly in the US and developing countries, and particularly the Blue Pacific, Polynesia, Melanesia, that sort of area there, where they're actually trying to bring in the CHIP program, go back to more cereals and grains, which need to be imported to the populations of the world that have got the highest rates of obesity and diabetes. So the top 10 obese countries in the world come from the Blue Pacific, Polynesia. Everyone says, oh, my country is more obese than the other. I always laugh about that, But in fact, when you look at the figures, it's the top 10 obese countries in the world are the Polynesian ones, and they're 9 of the top 10 for diabetes. And the only one that sneaks in at 10 is I think it's Kuwait, because they don't have alcohol, so they drink lots of soft drink.
Wow.
So we think we might be fat and sick in Australia, but we look at those indigenous populations, and what's happening is this pilgrimage of righteousness from religious groups, but particularly the SDA, wants to then take these people away from their traditional diets and move them towards a highly processed food diet. And it can only have one effect, and they're getting fatter, sicker, more obesity, more diabetes.
Wow.
And when you look into those areas and start looking where the influence is, right through to a political level, and it's what half a dozen of the presidents and prime ministers of Polynesian countries are now Seventh-day Adventist. You go, whoa! So we're not talking about.
I discovered that.
That's Belinda's work.
It's the Gary Show.
I acknowledge it. Every day I come home, Belinda says, "You wouldn't believe what I found out this time." Yeah?
Seriously, I can think back on maybe 3 or 4 different events on my own nutritional journey where I encounter something that's so bizarre. It doesn't even make sense. You read one of Gary Taubes or Nina Teichel's books, and it's everything you've been told about nutrition is wrong, and it blows your mind. And then you learn that Sean Baker is off eating ribeye steaks and nothing else, and not eating vegetables, and he's crushing it. And then maybe you learn from Sally Norton that oxalates in plants all of the superfoods that you think are amazing for you, all the sweet potatoes and the chard and the spinach and the almonds could be possibly bad for you. That just like blew my mind at the time. And this is absolutely one of those stories. So Belinda, tell us, how in the world did the Seventh-day Adventist Church, start? I believe it was started by Ellen White. She was the one that was having the visions, at least. Yes. Can you tell us how that whole thing started and how that propagated into today, where they still are influencing our nutritional guidelines on a massive scale that nobody realizes, besides you?
Well, it's not just me. Frederick Leroy and James Connolly, the three of us are sort of looking into this religious space and then that impact and where it's flowing. Frederick Leroy goes right off into a whole lot of other information as well. So, but I think people have underestimated this religious ideology that has impacted our dietary guidelines and the belief. So in 1863, the Seventh-day Adventist Church was officially incorporated, but it was a break-off group from the Millerites back in 1844. The great disappointment when Jesus didn't return to earth. And there was a guy called Hiram Edson the very next day after Jesus didn't return, and he had a vision in a cornfield that Jesus was moving from his holy place to his most holy place, and then he was starting to write the books of whether we were good or we were bad. He was there creating this new space. So Ellen G. White, a few months later, had a very similar vision back in 1844. And as time went on, she and a group of very, very young Adventists, which is what they call themselves. And so Ellen was 16 or 17 at the time. James White, her husband-to-be, was 23. He was the oldest of the young group. But we're talking about people who are 15, 10, 13. These young people were organizing this religious belief through these visions that Ellen was getting about the next life. And she went on to talk about the fact that the Seventh-day Adventist Church, which they were part of, were the spiritual children of Israel. And if the original children of Israel had done the commandments that Jesus had asked, Jesus would have come back and the world would have finished. We would have all been up in heaven. So she truly started to take it on herself that she and this group of people were the ones that were going to save everybody and take this message further. And she was told in 1863 to use this health reform visions that she was getting about the importance of the Garden of Eden diet, fruit, nuts and seeds. So that was the original.
Fruit, nuts and seeds, not even vegetables.
Not even vegetables.
So the exclusion of animal meats, and you can talk about that, but not even vegetables. So the whole original Garden of Eden diet was fruits, nuts, and seeds.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting too, because I wonder back in the time how many vegetables were even around, and the way that we recognize vegetables in the grocery store today, there may have been a complete difference in availability.
Exactly. And then she went on to have a couple more within a year. I think she was being told by God that meat was carcinogenous. It was dangerous. And meat in 1863, when she was told, it animalized people. It caused people to masturbate and self-vice, which was the term they used back then. And it became about polluting people. So this concept was very, very strongly brought into the church. Interestingly, she didn't actually give up meat until she was in the 1890s, when she came out to Australia, to Sanitarium apparently. So despite the fact that she's propagating this messaging that this is what spiritual people should be eating, and certainly the Seventh-day Adventist Church were advocating those things, she did talk about eggs and milk and butter as something that we would eventually get rid of. But that's why John Harvey Kellogg was so intent on creating these alternative foods to those things, because they couldn't really get rid of eggs, milk and butter because of the importance of vitamin B12 and other essential vitamins and minerals that were in these things, and essential protein. So they had to work out a way to create foods that would take that place. And when she came to Australia, she set up Sanitarium here, which was based on John Harvey Kellogg's model at the Seventh-day Adventist Church's Battle Creek Sanitarium in Michigan. but this time she wanted the church to own it. So Kellogg's was never owned by the church. It was founded and funded by Seventh-day Adventists, and the church helped fund, but they actually owned Sanitarium here in Australia. And this is where the expert witness that was brought into the AHPRA Medical Board's case, he was working for Sanitarium.
Wow.
And I suppose that's how I started to connect the dots as to the influence of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, was purely because of this expert witness. And it made me start to look at Sanitarium. And even though I was vaguely aware growing up that it was owned by a church, you do and you don't. And I guess a lot of people in America would be very similar. You are aware that there's universities and that there's different things owned by the church, but are you aware of how influential those places are in educating people about the demonization of animal proteins and fats? And so I'd gone into it looking for sugar, found low carb, but had not expected that Gary wasn't just in trouble for talking about cereals and sugar and reducing those. He was in, I reckon, just as much trouble for talking about animal proteins and fats, the health benefits of those. And so that just blew my mind.
So go back in time, because that whole concept of meat causes cancer probably wasn't cancer per se. It was probably cancer of the soul.
Yeah.
So that whole early belief of meat causes cancer, meat causes violence, meat causes masturbation, is actually all what they
spiritual, moral defilement.
Yeah, and so, but tell the link between why John Harvey Kellogg then became obsessed with trying to sort that out.
Yeah, well, he was 12 years old when he went to work for the Seventh-day Adventist Church's first founding family, James and Ellen White, and he was in charge of typesetting for them. That's how he was going to earn some money, because his father was such a devout Seventh-day Adventist that he believed the end of the world was so soon that he decided his children didn't need educating.
Well, I learned that today from listening to some of your material. I had no idea. That right there tells you how strong their beliefs were. Wow.
How strong their beliefs were that the world was going to end if they could just let enough people know. And so John Harvey Kellogg was 12. And if you look at a 12-year-old, how impressionable are 12-year-olds in their environment, in what they're learning? Like, they just drinking it all up. And I think that must have been an incredible time for him to be immersed in that area for 4 years.
But he was typesetting her first book.
Yeah, okay to that.
Oh, okay.
So typesetting her first book, which was a solemn appeal to mothers. And this book spoke only of deterring your children from masturbating. So in every sort of way, it was everything from, put them on a hard floor. She and John Harvey Kellogg actually worked out how to create genital cages to stop children touching themselves. Like, it went further and further. But
oh my goodness.
Meat, do not put meat on the table of your child, because this will stimulate them to have self-vice. And so she also put into this book all the terrible things that were going to happen to children should they eat meat and masturbate. And so we've all heard of masturbation causes loss of vision. I think it still sort of perpetuates vaguely around life even now. I've heard that when I was growing up. So
wow.
That's sitting there. But she talked about that it would decay heads, and it was as if you'd put a pistol to your own chest and killed yourself. He was 12 to 16 listening to this messaging of how terrible meat was, morally, spiritually, and physically. He was immersed in that. And I often say, is it any wonder that when he became a medical doctor, which James and Ellen White actually paid for him to study medicine and become the superintendent of the Western Health Reform Institute, and which he then changed the name to Battle Creek Sanitarium. So he became the head of that. Is it any wonder, though, that he was so intent on creating these alternates to meat, milk, and eggs and butter? This was his lifelong quest to save people.
He was brilliant, though.
He was a very smart man.
I mean, he was able to start the Battle Creek Sanitarium, which has become the model for every major hospital in the Western world.
He was the first person to wear white as a doctor.
Wow, I didn't know that. Interesting.
All white,
so
like shoes the whole way.
Multi-level buildings where you bring all the services together.
Yes.
into the one environment, that is the modern hospital setting. John Harvey Kellogg, he's clearly misguided, but he was brilliant. He was able to, drag together people, and the great names of that era used to come to Battle Creek Sanitarium for cleansing and their washouts, and literally their washouts.
Yeah.
Before that, the hospitals tended to just have people who were very, very sick, derelict. And if you worked in a hospital, you were at great risk of actually catching a disease and dying yourself. That's where Florence Nightingale was coming in and trying to change conditions in hospitals. So they started the opposite way. They started as a health and wellness retreat with, all the water treatments that he did and enemas. He was just passionate about getting everything out of the colon. So I think this is where, this bland food and this high fiber diets and everything else came from, was this, you just didn't want anything in there that might irritate and stimulate anything down below. So he was a massive fan of colonic enemas.
Wow.
But he did change the concept of the hospital as it grew and grew, because they ended up having 1,200 people were able to attend that hospital at one time.
Wow.
Which was, as Gary said, unheard of. And the concept that doctors had to wear white and then the uniforms for the nurses became very much a part of American hospital procedures.
So interesting. So he invents cornflakes as like this really bland food as the alternative for the meat and the eggs that will boost your testosterone. For how
not boost your testosterone, dampen it.
Yeah, right. And for how scary Ellen White's writings were on certain things, I think he took it a step further. Right? Some of his writings on masturbation itself are really insane. Like, he was in favor of circumcision for adults without painkillers, and not just male and female. And you read some of the ways that he would talk about people who did it. It's like a little scary. You're supposed to be cast down to the seventh hell of fire and brimstone or whatever. It's kind of scary.
I had a great chat with James Connolly. Just one sec. I had a great chat with James Connolly last week, and he sort of did a bit of a light bulb moment for me, where they were looking at people who were in insane asylums, and these people were locked up with nothing else to do, and they found that they were masturbating. So they looked at them and said, well, they're masturbating, that's caused their insanity, and that's why they're polluting and making themselves so bad. So if you think back to those days, I went, of course, that starts to make a little bit of sense as to why they thought that caused insanity, whereas potentially those people were locked up and had nothing else to do.
Wow.
Sorry.
That's crazy. We're going to host James here in a few weeks, so I'll be sure to ask him about that for sure. That's crazy.
Yeah, it's a really, really light bulb moment for me with all of the research that I've done. I went, oh, of course, that sort of makes some sense there.
Crazy. Okay, so I can think about, way back then, that's in the 1800s, coming into the 1900s. I'm here in Salt Lake City, Utah. I was raised Mormon, so I'm no stranger to prophets in the 1800s having wacky visions and things that, 14 years old, Joseph Smith had his visions and starts his church and everything else. And, having visions of what people should eat. There's a really famous thing in Mormon literature called the Word of Wisdom, which tells Mormons they shouldn't drink, they shouldn't do drugs, they shouldn't drink coffee, what kinds of foods they should eat. Anyway, so we can think about that and we can think, okay, that was a long time ago. Surely those things can be left in the past. They don't affect us now. Maybe they have those one or two universities or whatever. I can think of Loma Linda. I can't name any other institution that's owned by them, yet there are thousands, and they get into the guidelines and have been in the guidelines. Can you explain how it was that their influence way back then still impacts us in a way that's far greater than most people imagine today?
Well,
this is their commission. They've been commissioned by God, and so
therefore they have been. They don't go to war. They don't take up arms, which is quite nice, because if you're going to take them on, they're probably the one religion which is least likely to come along and kill you.
That's good.
We hope.
Christianity doesn't have a good history when it comes to that. So
no, I know. So we do respect them for that belief. We encourage that one. But the medical evangelism is the right arm of the church. So they have been working and putting their people and supporting them up the tree for decades. Their business model for getting this across has been in action for 100 years.
And
more than 100 years.
Medical evangelism and that health reform message.
So that, they were able to move vegetarianism as an acceptable form into the guidelines. But when you actually looked at the people in the US one and the Australian one, when they had those position papers, they were all virtually Seventh-day Adventist members, bar one from the food industry. You've got to drill down to what Belinda drilled down for that. And so they keep positioning themselves generation upon generation. And then, so therefore, they've got this political model, which has been very effective, and they've been able to move into the guidelines. But they've also got a business model, which has been coming along beside that. And here in Australia, they don't pay taxes. So all of their profit literally goes into
the commercial church.
The commercial church literally goes into continuing this health and well-being message. The Sanitarium here in Australia are the health and well-being company. It's registered. And they're one of Australia's most trusted companies because they tell us that they are. And if you keep repeating this message,
you believe it.
People, if you keep hearing, like it's in Reader's Digest, it just keeps coming at you. We're the health and well-being company. It comes across all the time. They were the ones that wrote the algorithm here in Australia for the Health Star rating, which actually surprisingly supports their processed food. So that therefore they get 4 to 5 stars for their highly processed food, and full fat yogurt gets 1.
That's because they demonized animal protein and fat.
And so, in the supermarkets, when you go there, they've got the Health Star rating on the food, and the Health Star rating supports their product. So that's what they'll advertise, and gets 4 stars. Those ones that the full fat doesn't actually have a Health Star rating on it because they get bagged out by this industry. And it's continued on to the education. So therefore, then you get the medical students being taught it, you get the nutrition students, the dietitian students, and they just keep believing this. We've actually gotten hold of used and looked at the textbooks that the dietitians here in Australia learn from currently. And it doesn't actually even refer to meat in it. It does with meat. There's one reference with meat in a table, and then 2 references to mad cow disease.
And they didn't even realize, because the education has become so siloed into little areas, that they hadn't seen or realized that they were being educated about the demonization of animal proteins and fats subconsciously. It's really interesting. And so when I looked at this man, Mark Walquist, and what he was actually doing, the expert witness for AHPRA, he was part of the IUNS, which is the International Union of Nutrition Science. He was the president from 2001 to 2005. And at the end of his presidency, he organized for a meeting in Gießen in Germany. And they had this meeting where they determined, and I'm saying they, and it included Esther Vorster, who was the nemesis in Tim Noakes's case. And it included Joan Sabat, who was part of the US 2020 Dietary Guidelines Committee as a devout Adventist with this same belief. So we've got 3 people, actually many people, but these 3 that are very clear in my mind, creating a document and signing a declaration there that they were going to include planetary health into dietetic education. And by putting planetary health, the concept, that was the way then they could bring into dietetics, and that was early 2000s. That was the way they could really substantially demonize animal proteins and fats in the dietetic education.
If we go back to the 1960s, when the Adventist health studies were started, a lot of people have heard about the Adventist health studies. They keep repeating them, but they keep reciting themselves as being proof that a vegan vegetarian lifestyle is actually most beneficial. If you go back 5 to 10 years before that, Harry China Miller was a doctor who did a lot of reform work, did a lot of work in China, but also set up a whole lot of soy industries in China, and then brought that whole soy product to the US. He came back to the US and set up research laboratories to prove the visions of Ellen G. White.
Not disprove it.
Not to disprove. Science is all about disproving your hypothesis. Here's your hypothesis. Let's try and prove it incorrect. Whereas he came back and set it up to prove that visions were correct. And flowing on from that were the Adventist health studies, which were done to prove something, not to disprove it. And then they keep reciting it. Each of the Adventist health studies has been recited over 400 times by themselves. So if you look up citations, it's incredibly well cited. And therefore, because it's repeated over and over and over and over, I've looked at it. The Mormons actually have a greater longevity in the US than the Adventists do. If you look at, and so do the Ashkenazi Jews. It's there, the data is there, but you don't hear about the Mormons and the Jews outliving everyone else. All you hear about as Adventists at Loma Linda, as part of Blue Zones, which is again just made up.
That's another.
Beware the blue zones, can I just say? Beware the blue zones. I uncovered last year, there was the 89th US Congress of Mayors. And at that Congress, 1,400 mayors have just signed and passed as official policy the adoption of the blue zones. And that's really scary in America. And someone said to me recently, why do you know so much about America? But I can't help myself. It's easier to find it there than it is here. So the concept of the blue zones project, the branding of the blue zones was bought by Adventist Health in 2020. And now you've just had 1,400 mayors sign up to say, yes, we're going to do this.
Great.
And when you look at their graphic about what you eat, it's called a plant slant diet, 95 to 100% plants. That's what they believe the blue zones ate. But the demographers didn't say that. It was Dan Buttner in 2005 who found Loma Linda as a blue zone, a journalist. And he and the couple of demographers branded this because you couldn't create a pill for longevity. Fountain of Youth have been looking at forever, could not find a pill to create that. So they worked on creating a concept that they believe crossed all of the boundaries, or picked the best of each of these different areas, but they took the diet from Loma Linda. And that was the thing that they said, yes, this is what we need to pull in, which does not agree with Sardinia and Okinawa,
where they had
Ikaria.
Those other, the original blue zone areas.
All ate lard.
All ate lard, all ate animal proteins and fats. But in fact, the original one wasn't a study of diet. It was a study of culture.
Yes.
Sure. Yeah, that's right.
Had nothing to do with diet. And then it became this concept of, hang on, this is maybe a sellable product. And then they literally came along, and then Loma Linda was included because you needed to sell books in the US. In
the US, that's right. They needed to have an American one, Dan Buttner.
You're not going to make lots of book sales if I'm talking about Sardinia and Okinawa. So therefore they needed to entrench a US community.
Did not know that.
And then so Loma Linda came into that. And then they said, okay, because Loma Linda's now in it, okay, what's that? That's it. Well, that's theoretically the Garden of Eden diet, which, as we've just talked about, completely unsustainable, eating fruits, nuts, and seeds. It's not even vegan, vegetarian. It's just so literally off the planet. And as it turns out, the definition of vegan, according to the Adventist Health Study, is that you don't eat meat more than once a month. And vegetarian not more than once a week. So, well, hang on, this isn't vegan, this isn't vegetarian, this isn't that traditional Eastern vegetarian, this is Western marketing, what I call marketing-based science. You've heard of evidence-based science? Then you've got called eminence-based science, which is what a lot of what we're up against, which people, professor said this, so therefore that's the way it stays. I've got this other term called marketing-based science, and this is just all marketing-based science, and it's literally just made up. But if you control the message and you control the advertising, and you have a message of fear, so meat causes cancer, meat causes masturbation, meat causes violence, meat causes cancer, meat causes heart disease, which we moved to now, meat causes planetary decline.
That's
for
right.
climate change. It's literally just made up. But if you keep having this message of fear, and it's going to be this, terrible abomination for all of society now, because they didn't win on meat causes violence, masturbation, cancer, or even heart disease. So now meat causes climate change is the latest tact.
Yep.
And when you just track it all back, it's just, people believe this stuff because you keep hearing it.
And the concern is that vegan definition might well work for people who are Seventh-day Adventists. Like to have meat once a month.
Right.
It may be enough to sustain their health.
That's
but
right.
The general public doesn't hear that.
They don't know.
They hear vegan and they go, that's no animal proteins and no animal fats. And so I think this is also something we need to really highlight and question, is that that's not the public's perception of a definition.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. That is such a good point. For somebody that's unfamiliar with the blue zones, and again, I'm glad you brought up the kind of original idea of the study. We notice a few places that have more octogenarians. So is that right? Did I say that right?
Yes. Yes.
People that live to be, centenarians. We see more centenarians.
But a lot of them actually didn't have high centenarians. But
so it's 80 or more.
Yes,
okay, good. I'm still right. Okay, awesome. So we notice these places, people seem to live longer. Great, let's go check them out, see what they're doing. So diet might be part of it. It might be that they are really active and healthy. Maybe their community is a big part of it. There's so many confounding variables, just like everything else in epidemiology. You can only look at an area, make some associations, but you can't prove causation. And this gets brought up all the time. I get questions about the blue zones all the time. And the number of inconsistencies when you start to go over to, the journalists who report about it, Loma Linda is far less populated than some of these other areas. I want to say it's like 23,000 people are even there. There's questions about other places on the planet where people live far longer, like indigenous tribes. People brought up Iceland. Why wasn't Iceland included? They eat tons of animal products and they live very long, healthy lives. It's absolutely ridiculous to say that it's like vegetables and fruits that is what is keeping these people alive. It's not even true.
The other areas are geographically isolated. They're removed from Western food. Loma Linda's removed from Western food because they make all their food. Gary and I went into the supermarket. It is canned, packaged. There is a small area of fresh food, but absolute buckets.
Well, no, it would have been most of it imported fresh food.
Imported fresh. And then they had these buckets and massive containers of all of the alternative meats, milks, and cereals. Was just mind-blowing how much they had there. And I think the idea with the other blue zone areas is they looked at birth certificates and they looked at people that were entrenched in those areas. In Loma Linda, especially, it wasn't even discovered until 1910 by Ellen G. White, and then they built the university and the hospital and things there. So people weren't necessarily born there as Seventh-day Adventists. And the Life Assurance Ministries, which are a group of ex-Adventists, say that really it's a retirement village. So the people who are affluent, which the other blue zone areas are not affluent, so people are affluent, health conscious, and doing really, really well, tend to migrate there. But they also have the benefit of a massive hospital. And so other Seventh-day Adventists who may be there are people who work at the university and the hospital. There's about 9,000 of that 23 that are Seventh-day Adventists. Wow. And some people there are doing very, very well with their health. But there's other confounding factors, the spiritualism, and a great thing that I read the other day was they don't want to cheat. In our normal society, if you decide you don't want to eat dessert anymore, you want to reduce your sugar, you're so pressured by people around you because of their guilt. Oh, go on, just have a little bit of this, just have a little bit of that. At Loma Linda, nobody would say that because everybody wants to hold on to their belief that they are eating the right way because of a religious teaching. So that would also make a huge difference to those people at Loma Linda.
Yeah. Wow.
But
not all Seventh-day Adventists are healthy.
But it's not an original blue zone. It's
right.
just, and if you look at the diet of the original blue zones, they were largely based on animal-based foods, protein and healthy fats, and they ate
and they ate plants.
and they ate plants. It wasn't highly processed
No.
food. And I just can't believe the results that the Adventist groups are coming out with, because the studies are being done to prove something.
Yeah.
Their definitions are fluid. There's this a big paper that's come out recently from the American Society of Lifestyle Medicine about American College, for the guidelines for diabetes management, and talk about a fluid document. Whoa! They couldn't. They looked for consensus statements, not literature. They only found 60 out of 131 that sort of fitted their narrative, and that was only after they changed 11 of them.
Wow.
And then they couldn't prove that they could put diabetes into remission for 6 months. So then they changed the definition of remission of diabetes to 3 months. They talk about it in the paper. I said to Belinda, this is a smoke and mirrors paper, but without any mirrors, because they're not reflecting on it. And it's so non-transparent, it's just all smoke. But the trouble is that document then gets adopted by the American Endocrinological Society as being that plant-based is a method of putting diabetes into remission. I can't find the papers that actually say that. And diabetes, the best papers that have been coming out plant-based, saying that you can reduce the HbA1c, the control of diabetes, by 0.3%. That 0.3% is nothing.
Nothing.
And it's
Compared to the people you've been interviewing.
it's not remission,
It's like ridiculous.
And this is, but nonetheless, they keep saying it. They keep publishing. Oh, they published it in their own journal, by the way. Yeah, so it's not. And peer review was one of their members actually reviewing what the president of the organisation had written. So
convenient.
So the American College of Lifestyle Medicine began as the American Christian Lifestyle Medicine, and it was the Christian Association of Lifestyle Medicine. It was called CALM at the beginning at Loma Linda University in 2003. It became the American College of Lifestyle Medicine in 2004, with exactly the same people, the same 9 key people that are devout Seventh-day Adventists at that thing. But the American College of Lifestyle Medicine has grown and grown. It's now running exams around the world. And what I say to the Australasian Society of Lifestyle Medicine here is that no matter, even if you don't have people on your board who are Seventh-day Adventists, when regular people, say Gary was to sign up for the Australasian Society of Lifestyle Medicine, which has a seemingly endless benevolent agenda. And it does sound really, really good. But you don't realize until you get in there that their plant-based discussions are actually heading towards veganism. They are demonizing animal proteins and fats. And they've got people in the cereal industry and everyone else. But when these people sign up to be part of that society, they do the exams with the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. And these exams were written by the founder and key people in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and also, unfortunately, key people in Coca-Cola. So the idea is for health professionals, and I'm talking all health professionals, including exercise physiologists, dietitians, medical doctors and nurses, dietitians, everybody. The idea is for them to write prescriptions for lifestyle medicine and exercise as medicine. And this idea is that people will eat less, move more, eat less meat. And if you don't understand that that messaging is coming from religious ideology and vested interests, it's really hard to challenge that. And you get caught up in that whole society, in these societies everywhere, all around the world. But the American College of Lifestyle Medicine is the hub. It is the basis of this whole lifestyle medicine branding. And that's where it's come from. And
with a huge, because they've got this enormous amount of money behind them, because we're talking the cereal industry, the soy, the alternate meat industries, with their basis, which can then push this down the pathway of medical education to get lifestyle medicine into the universities. How many universities?
I think it's in 8 universities in the US at the moment. and they're pushing to get it into medical education here in Australia. And I'm jumping up and down trying to go, excuse me. But even the society says, but we are not involved with this, we're not the Seventh-day Adventist Church in our society, because interestingly, the church has a very small footprint here in Australia. They have this massive food industry, they have a university college, and they have maybe 3 or 4 smaller private hospitals. That's all. You've got 84 hospitals in the US owned by the church, plus now the blue zones, which is able to get into so many more cultures.
1,400 communities.
1,400 communities, plus they want to run the blue zones across all of the West Coast.
And those Hawaii. Communities have paid.
One of them, I found a document saying $6.5 million for them to be accredited as a blue zone.
So that's your local mayor. I'm sorry,
up.
Your local mayor has just signed up to make your community into a blue zone and probably paid
$6.5 million.
May have paid $6.5 million to a church organisation so that you can take up a fake blue zone mentality. So, they've got cash coming in hand over foot, and they've been convincing regulators, administrators, politicians, and at a local level. It sounds great. Lifestyle medicine, what a great term, And if you go on to, they've got everything on lifestyle medicine. If you've got all the different Google searches, .com, .net,
This was a long time ago because they've got other ones.
They've got the other ones now.
But they owned all of the...
The only one they don't have is one we have.
But
lifestylemedicine.wiki. I don't know what we're going to do with it, but I finally I found one that don't have.
That's great.
But they literally have this media saturation and political saturation, and they say right through to American Dietary Guideline Committee, World Health Organization, government, United Nations, politicians. Can we change it all? No. Can we make more people aware? Yes. And the mere fact that we're having this conversation with you, and that you've got Jane's book there, the great plant-based con, it means that more and more people are getting aware. And because there's only one exit strategy here, and that's to be led by the people.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important just to say, we're not anti-religion. It might sound like it. We're not anti-religion. We're not anti-vegan. We're pro-choice. And it wasn't until I realized that our choice, Gary's choice to improve his own health and the health of his patients, was being taken away by a group that was protecting their ideology. And I'm very much about the corporate church when I talk about this. Not many individuals, most individuals within any church, religion, believe what they're being told, and they love the community that they're involved in. So I'm not talking about individuals necessarily. This is about the corporatization of a church that is profiting off, I would say, band-aiding sick care, because they are absolutely strict and have such a strong structure around this promotion of a diet that isn't necessarily about health unless you eat all of their highly processed, fortified, supplemented foods. And they are taking it into third world countries. And as Gary mentioned before, when he talked about this medical evangelism as the right arm of the church and their health reform message being the entering wedge, I've found multiple documents stating they're able to get into places like China that won't necessarily allow Christianity in there. They take it in as health. They say, we'll open a hospital, we'll open this, we'll help educate people. And that is the concern, that they do truly use it as an entering wedge. They will use it as an entering wedge to the secular community. We'll do a cooking class with you. We'll do this. And then people are brought into that. They don't talk about the church for a while. Like it's a bit insidious how a lot of the work is done, because this is a total member involvement. That's what the actual General Conference have called it. Every single member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church is to use their health reform message as an entering wedge to society in whatever way they can do it. And certainly as a medical community, That's their belief, that's their commission, and they are purpose driven. And until they encourage enough people to give up meat, their belief is there's no point Jesus coming back to earth, because in the Garden of Eden, we won't be eating meat. And so he's not going to waste his time, from what I've been reading, in coming back until they get enough people to convert. And certainly themselves. If you read some of Ellen G. White's early writings, she says, no person who is teaching health, no minister will eat meat, will have it on their table. No meat, milk, eggs. Didn't talk about eggs and butter as strictly, but in time that will happen. And that's again why Harry Miller and these other guys, the Adventist Health Studies, have to prove that you can actually be healthy without those things. So they have to create the foods to provide that. And that's, it's like a pyramid scheme.
Yeah. It sounds like a Trojan horse, getting that into a place where you're not able to go, and then the deception comes later.
If there are any Chinese government agricultural ministers listening to this podcast, my understanding is that the western regions of China are now being opened up for cereal, grain, and soy production. Not the traditional
fermented soys and things like this. This is commercial.
This is
so westernized.
So there goes your soil. Your soil is going to be toast.
It's and that's we haven't even touched on soil and environment today. We talk about that and other things, but unless we look after the soil, we're not going to get decent food. If you don't get decent food, you're not going to get decent health.
That's right.
And this is a real crossroads. But again, I think if you're privileged enough to actually have access to good food, and my dietary guidelines have really simplified. I've rewritten the dietary guidelines for the world in one sentence, which is my message. It happens to be low carb, healthy fat. I'd rather we don't talk about healthy fat rather than high fat. I know in the intro you said high fat, but I think it's about low carb, healthy fat. So my dietary guidelines for the world are: eat fresh, local, seasonal, whole food based on your environment and culture, reducing added sugar and processed food. Now, if you think about that, that is the ancestral diet. That's the evolutionary diet. That's taking into account where you live, what you can supply, supporting your local farmer, not having huge transport miles on your food, eating by the seasons, eating up in the summer the fruits so that you can store them as fat in the winter. We shouldn't be eating
bananas
highly processed food
in Tasmania.
Yeah.
That's right.
People say bananas are good for you. I said, okay, come to Tasmania and find me the banana plantation. Okay, which is we're 42 degrees south. You try and find banana plantations 42 degrees north. I mean, they're not many.
No, that's right. Well, okay, so that was going to be my final question for you. Is somebody listening to this, maybe this is the first time they've heard any of this. They think it sounds absolutely bonkers, but they're in, like they want to do something about this. I think all of us can agree that, the system is probably not going to change. The governments are not all of a sudden going to change. These things take, enormous amounts of power and money to kind of overthrow, and they're very well established at this point. For an individual, and I know you just gave us some really good recommendations. Is that what you would say to most people, is like, this is what you can do as an individual?
Yes. Absolutely.
Well, I'm a great believer in the power of the word, and that not in a spiritual, but literally, one person hears about this and then they can tell another person, oh, you wouldn't believe what I just heard. Okay. And go along and try and look and try and disprove it. Belinda's lectures, my lectures are on YouTube. Her work's on the I Support Gary website, the new one, BelindaFettke.com
is coming. Only because my godson said to me that, Belinda, I'm a doctor. I'm not going to look on I Love Gary for my medical.
Well, I support.
No, he said, I'm not going to look on I Love Gary for my medical education. I can't recommend any of this to anyone else. So I thought I Support Gary was started to help clear Gary's name, to challenge the guidelines, to challenge the medical board. So now I think I'm getting enough confidence to actually create a website that is talking more about my research rather than just saying it's because of where it's come from. I've done nearly 8 years now, and it's pretty amazing.
I think the talks, the YouTube access, we're both on Twitter, but Belinda's on Facebook, Belinda Fettke, no fructose. She took over
I took over his page, so it's not really no fructose anymore.
It was Gary Fettke, no fructose, but because the medical board wouldn't let me speak about it, we literally just, I literally just drew a line through Gary and just wrote Belinda in handwriting across the image, which the medical board didn't like because I literally just extended my middle finger to them. Yeah, because the message is too important. A few messengers are going to go by the wayside. We're lucky we're still standing, but it's hard work. I know of people who have just felt too pressured to continue on. Pressure, and so our role is to support those people who want to run with the message, whether or not they run for a meter or they run for a mile. It doesn't matter. We because as I've regularly quoted, once you see it, you can't unsee it. I always love it when someone quotes that back to me, because I know I started that 10 years ago. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. You can't see the health benefits for you. You can't unsee the health benefits for yourself, your family.
Yeah.
And I started this by testing it on my surgical team. We did it myself. Belinda can tell the story that if I came home and threw one more thing out of the pantry, we're not having this, we're not having this, we're not having this. I came home one day and she said, if you take bacon out of the fridge, you're out. So the bacon stayed.
Smart.
Yeah, I think it's about empowering people and just knowing that there's a growing tribe that are here to support. And to me, that's very, very exciting moving forward.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. I love that message. I love the word empowering. And I think we can do a lot more of that. And I look at your story and, some of the times that I get really bummed out and get feeling really pessimistic that the thing is not turning around fast enough. I look at people like you and I do think about the people, well justified, I would add, that didn't carry the message forward because it was too difficult or they weren't making an income. And I get it. I totally understand. And I wouldn't fault
exactly.
anybody for doing that. And you guys fought the good fight. And I would point out that not only did you clear up your name, Gary, but this really paves the way for a lot of people and medical practitioners to continue this work. And that's going to have a global impact. It's incredible.
Yep.
It was really important that my name was cleared. Tim Noakes's name was cleared. Anna Dahlquist's name was cleared, because that literally meant for those countries, but beyond that, this can't be challenged, because this is just science. I call it, this is applied biochemistry, applied physiology. This is living biochemistry, living physiology. We're not designed, we didn't evolve to be eating highly processed food. And guess what? We're paying the price for it now. So let's get back to what our ancestral diet was, or what Ken Berry will call the proper human diet. We're all saying the same thing.
Yep.
We're just using different ways of getting that message across. And it's just, you can argue as much as you want. I'll listen to your argument, but you're going to fail on the science.
Yep. Yeah, I totally agree. And you guys have done just an amazing job getting that science out to people. And we're just so grateful for that work. If you don't mind, one more time, where would you like people to go to find you and connect with your work?
Well, I think if you find most of our lectures where it gives its whole story is on YouTube. So Gary Fettke, Belinda Fettke. I'm on Twitter as Fructose No. Belinda's...
I'm not really doing a lot of Twitter at the moment. I tend to focus more on Facebook and LinkedIn.
Cool.
They're the two social media. I got so caught up, I don't know, like everybody else in COVID, I decided family had to prioritize a little bit. So I pulled back.
We had 8 in the house here for
that's great.
A little while isn't a year, don't we?
Yeah. Grandchildren, everything. So I just went, I'm pulling back, but I think I've got a very established group of people on LinkedIn and on Facebook, two quite different groups, but they're the main areas that I would use, and the I Support Gary website at the moment, which I will let you know when it becomes Belinda Fettke. But yeah, I just think they're probably the places, but also we've been interviewed by lots of people. And thank you so much, Casey. I'm sorry we didn't get to meet Bethany, but how fantastic to meet you, and congratulations on all the work that you're doing and connecting all these people. So
where's her excuse note?
She needs an excuse note. Yeah, she had clients she had to take today. She does really amazing body work with people and gets people out of pain. So she had to step up to that. But I'm just so grateful for both of you. I'm so grateful for everything that you guys are doing, and that you would take the time to be on our show today. We really appreciate you and all of your work. So thank you so very much for everything you do. And thank you so much for appearing on our show today. We really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Casey. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.